Hello, James Donnelly of the Shadow Gallery. I wanted to make a response video to you because I spent pretty much literally all day listening to you talking about comics whilst I worked, which is good because you probably actually prevented a homicide today, so good deed for the day. Check for you. Awesome. And I first off was wondering if you happened across Anna Mercury before. It seemed like something you would have been into, kind of that Jennifer bloodline, something I tried a couple issues of, I wasn't sure about. Wasn't sure if you had an opinion on that. But, anyways, love the reviews as always, and I wanted to respond to your top 10 runs. To lay out the video, I plan on responding to what I wanted to respond to you about in your video, then kind of talk a little bit, and then try to attempt it on my own. So that's where we're going for you and anyone who else wants to play along. So I went back through your video because I couldn't remember everything and certainly couldn't remember the order, so if I botch any of this, please forgive me. But to go through and to review for other people, go check out his video if you haven't. It's only forever and a day, and it's worth every... there's a couple of minutes that could be lost, but for something that's an hour, whatever. So his runner-up is the classic JLI run, which I understand classic, a lot of things there, a lot of things I appreciate, and for comparatively to pretty much everything else he chooses, one of the more lighter, more humor-inspired reads, which is something that I definitely am more so than most, I'd say. You can tell by the way I'm analyzing critiquing this, can't you? And so that's awesome. And then I believe it's like within the first three, I think I mixed up something. But Criminal, I just read Last of the Innocent. That was phenomenal. And when I was first getting Criminal, when it was first coming out, I wasn't really on it, but I also had no taste for noir or criminal books. And since then, I've grown by leaps and bounds, and I think I really need to revisit it, but I just haven't yet because I've been going through a glut of other comics, mostly due to Howler Mouse and Minutia Minute so far, and just me catching up on I need to read. Then you go into Hellblazer. Hellblazer is one that I'd actually appreciate some guidance on. I've tried it before. I picked up the first two trades when they republished them recently, and I liked it, but I felt there were some pacing issues, and I just couldn't see myself going through trade after trade of it. I picked up one of the Garth Ennis that I found for cheaper. I enjoyed it, but I felt like it read in a minute. Like, I felt like I read a trade and the time would take me to read an issue, and that was... I don't know. But, it was still very good. Then you go on to Tome of Dracula. I wouldn't know, take your word on that, if there's a good collection or something to pick up, or if the issues are cheap somewhere. That'd be awesome. I guess I should look into that. And then you talk about, at 7, I believe, the classic Stan Lee, Jack Kirby Avengers run, which I certainly haven't read any of, as I am very deprived on my Kirby and whatnot in comics of that age. All of this, except for Criminals, kind of before when I really started reading, or before I've even gone back to Trace 2. And again, Whiteout, I read one of, it was good, but it didn't catch me at the time, but I read that when I was like 10, so it was one of the early trades, and I think I need to go back and revisit it now that I think I'm, in a place where I can appreciate Rucka, certainly. And then, again, we go to the Neil Adams, Danny O'Neill Batman at your number 5, I believe it was. And that is nothing I've read. I've heard amazing things, and I actually got a talking to at a comic shop once about like how those comics really changed the direction not only for Batman but for the industry, which is something you touched on, but it was Something I also heard from one of the local artists in our area, Scorpio Steele, who I believe has his own graphic novel coming out, and when he does, I will let people know about that. But he talks about how, more so than the story, though he's obviously art biased, how Danny O'Neill's just the look of Batman, the way that it moved, really took the stories that were, as you said, darker, that could have been portrayed in a different way with different artists, and really made this feeling and brought back kind of comics to something that could not necessarily fight the code, but kind of challenge things and become stronger stories, really, for having the chance to go darker, not having to be goofy and kids stuff merely, and really playing on that end. The fact that they did Batman with it is made it no less of a statement in that day and age, and that was interesting, and I'm paraphrasing, cobbling together things I heard there, so interesting stuff. And then, of course, you go to Chris Claremont, John Byrne, X-Men, Fear Number 4, and I've only really read the classic arcs and a few issues. This is undeniable stuff. It's tremendous. As far as it being a run, I couldn't speak to it as well. Clearly there's something there, but you do keep coming back to the Dark Phoenix, Days of Future Past, which is great, but I mean, I feel those are more arcs, a run, and I felt like some of the stuff in the arc I heard, I know, was here and there, and I don't know. It's interesting, but it's beyond me. Now, here's the one where we're going to pause for a minute, because I can't get into the full argument, obviously, but your third is Astonishing X-Men with Joss Whedon and Oatmeal Man, John Cassidy. I own the books, they're right there, swear to God. I do not hate them as much as the words that are about to spew forth might have you believe. First of all, John Cassidy is a great artist, his own style, that whole deal. I can never fully get behind it. Like I said, everything looks like Oatmeal Men. I just can't... It's always a cutback for me. Like, you could have him on a book, or you could have someone else, and I'd say almost someone else anytime, unless it's some notably terrible artist that is terrible, that no one wants there. I can think of a few names, but there's no reason to go there. But to that end, that's more or less my issues with the art. They stop in there, and it's serviceable, it's good even, but as far as, you know, the best of the best is not something I would put in there. To more the important part, though, the Joss Whedon part. First, I do believe Joss Whedon gets far too much credit, not only for this, but literally everything else, except for potentially Buffy, and even then, mostly some of the earlier years, considering how much he really had on some of the later stuff. I don't know, it feels a bit overblown, not to say he didn't do work, but there were so many other tremendous people on there, and so many people working hard, and the way I heard about the creative process, it seemed like he was able to gallivant in, have a nice fresh idea, and then leave, and it sounds frustrating to me. But to this book, yes, it did take forever, and that is something that to this day, I still have that taste in my mouth. It's not so much that, I mean, I don't mind when books go bi-monthly or a month is skipped, and if it's tremendous, it's true. But not only did he take the time, he convinced Marvel to throw in a giant special, which at the end really tore down the book by making this weird Marvel event to orchestrate around his pet project, and it just didn't feel right. Beyond that, most of the things that you talked about liking, I mean, the idea of Emma Frost being, you know, a hero in some respects, even if she is kind of bitchy, but it's kind of a weird mix, and she's definitively not Jean Grey. And she's not a pure antithesis either, which is for the best. I mean, she's her own person, but you can't help but draw comparisons given where they place her. And then clearly the Cyclops bit and where that is, and there's a few other elements there, and the problem is they all come hot off the heels of the Grant Morrison run, and in so many ways, I mean, the Emma Frost stuff completely set up. I mean, Joss Whedon just kind of continued that thread, and in some ways weakened it, in my opinion. Also, the way he deals with Cyclops seems a bit bizarre to me. It's a bit too jockish. It doesn't fit more of the child soldier / superhero grown up, which is one of the few things that actually Cyclops has that makes him unique in a lot of ways. Is, I mean, he's this legacy, not only superhero character, but a legacy leader as well, and how many characters really hold that torch. And I mean, it's played upon, but not in a way. And then, of course, there's the Kitty Pryde stuff, and then a lot of people really felt that Colossus's coming back was one of the best handled rebirths, as it were. And yeah, I feel that's true, but more to the end that they're usually handled so poorly that to see this is, I mean, was a step above, just because they basically just poof, bam, whatever, no real explanation needed, just kind of a line of thought to allow you to say, oh, okay, so we're not going to get to that later. It's literally just enough so you know you're not going to talk about it any more than that, really, except for obviously the emotional impact. Blech. And so, again, I don't dislike Astonishing X-Men, but it felt like just such a pure continuation from the new X-Men, which is something that was so much more daring and did so much more for the X-Men, and they actually took drastic changes, and notably editorially true too, in every other book going on alongside Astonishing X-Men, and then Astonishing X-Men after in some ways, and just it really wasn't its own book. I guess that's my main problem, is it doesn't feel so much like Joss Whedon's take on the X-Men as much as Joss Whedon getting handed some reins and allowing to play with this much, and I don't know, I just never felt it was that strong. And the reason I'm so adamant about it is because I hate everybody saying, you know, how great these Joss Whedon things are, when in reality they're not as such, and no one seems to talk about, you know, that line of influence. It's like he just came up with so much of this from thin air, and very much that's not true, because that could be said about nearly anything that receives that level of praise, including Watchmen, of course. Yeah. Anyways, Y the Last Man, again, you love it, and I find that interesting that that's one of the Vertigo ones you have so high up there. I loved the book until it felt like they didn't explain the event, and that always irked me, and that pulled me right out of the book. The last two trades just felt so hollow to me. I've never been able to revisit it because of that yet. I plan to someday. I have so much on my plate I can't say I'll read it soon. But, yeah, I found that interesting. That's so high for you, given that it seemed like the sort of thing that you normally wouldn't have been for. That I find that interesting. And then, of course, Preacher. Number one Preacher, fine. That wouldn't be my number one, but that's just personal taste at that point. I mean, Preacher is astounding. I have absolute love for Preacher. I had much the same experience you had with that. I mean, I had that experience with most of the Vertigo titles. I mean, I bought one trade to test it out, then I was in the comic store the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and then I just bought the rest of it because it's like, well, save money on gas, I guess. Except I was biking, but that's not important. Preacher is astounding, and is one of the few comics that whenever friends are looking for a comic or anything, I can convince them to read that, and they love it. And usually I can get them to read a comic or two after that, and maybe not as much. Maybe I missed the mark on whatever, but Preacher is one of those stories that not only is it excellent, not only is it great, it's a great example of what comics can be, and it's something that people can latch to, and something you can show them that is definitively not superheroes, but still fantastic enough that it really takes advantage of the medium, and oh my god. So there we go. One shot too, more like you. Hey, homage. There we go. So that is the things I had to say about that I didn't already type to you or whatnot, but yeah. And again, I'm not trying to piss on anything with the Astonishing X-Men bit. It's just that's the one that kind of stuck in my craw, and what's the fun without a little back and forth, right? So then my second bone to pick is very semantical, I guess, but it defines what I'm going to be doing next, and that is the take on what a run is. I'm not sure if you actually got your definition from whatever article you found, but I view it differently. I feel if you're going to talk about favorite comics and you're really going to break it down because you're into it as we are, I mean, if I'm talking video games or movies or CDs, it's a lot easier for me to break it down, obviously. But with comics, it becomes a bit more blurred. Partially because of the idea of, well, what's a collection, what's not. I mean, Watchmen was a series first, released independently and then collected, of course. But then again, so was Bartleby the Scrivener, yet that is considered a complete short fiction work, even though it was originally released in 3 parts. 2 or 3, sorry, any English nerds out there, I forget if it was 2 or 3. So, I have definitions that I'm going to stick to that completely color and would actually knock out what you consider to be runs for about half of them, it looks like. Obviously, I mean, issues are issues. Single, floppy issues, there's some variance there, but that's pretty clear. Then there's the idea of an arc. You know, your Dark Phoenix saga, your City at War for Ninja Turtles, your whatever, and that's great. And then the run starts to get a little weirder for me. My problem with you considering some of these runs, Criminal, I can kind of see that's kind of gray area. Hellblazer, totally, because there's so many different people that worked on them, they have runs on it. Same with Avengers. Whiteout hits that weird criminal thing. But then, like, Why the Last Man and Preacher, I don't consider runs. They're creator-owned books. I mean, you have the same people from beginning to end, and yes, maybe there's a side project or two with different creators that get to tack on to the universe. But really, there's that core book that is one story that started somewhere and definitively is going to end somewhere, and that is a creator-owned book that doesn't hit me as a run. Like, those hit me as two very different things. Also, to the idea earlier of a arc, there's also just like original graphic novels, what have you, and that to me seems academic. I mean, once it's collected, it's a graphic novel, whether or not it was published one way or not. If you can buy it and read it that way, it is a graphic novel, whether or not it was originally published that way or not, and that's a good thing to know, and I don't know. But anyways, point being, when we talk runs, I'm talking about, for the most part, books that are properties that other people have touched, but these people had a strong, long run with multiple arcs on it, which, of course, to your definition was like 8+ issues. This usually extends far beyond that. And so, which of course narrows things down. I mean, if I'm doing this the way I understand arcs, I can't touch any of the 60-issue Vertigo stuff, which is a lot of my favorite comics, hands down. Can't just be talking single issues. And, you know, I can't talk creator-owned books, which cuts out so much what I want. And the saddest part is, in all reality, it cuts me down to Marvel and DC. There's some Image stuff that technically fits this mold, but I don't think any of it's hitting anyone's top 10. So, brah. So I am going to go forward and show you my top 10 runs. And as I said, full disclosure, I mean, there's tons of things that are comics I love, and I always make sure to not always put in just Marvel and DC, because comics are so much more than that. But, you know, I mean, I can't talk about Scud, I can't talk about Preacher, Y, DMZ, I can't talk about, you know, couldn't even talk about Mesmo, even though that's just a single issue. There's a million things I can't talk about, so just understand that. I'm not just, I'm a complicated man. So my first favorite run is Remender's take on Venom, and various artists, obviously, though sticking mostly to a Marvel style, and the art isn't anything that's going to throw you out the window, but there's so many reasons I love this. I mean, it's really just a dark take on essentially the Spider-Man mythos and the Spider-Man cliche, really. And you just twist it on its head, and there's so much dark humor laced without, and there's so much building, and it moves so fast. And you see this character that already has had such a slow burn but crazy arc from where he began to where he is, and then you see that take a whole nother layer, and you have all this going on, and it really takes advantage of what Marvel and DC can do with some of these characters and allow you to take a few different elements and blend it together. I mean, it's really, in a lot of ways, when you think it, fairly ingenious that Slott originally took Flash Thompson and then made him Venom and completely took Eddie Brock out. Now, admittedly, this isn't as ingenious given that Mark Millar had already made the former Scorpion Venom before, and now you're just passing on the suit again. So you already had that kind of mold broken, but to assign it to this character allowed so many different things to happen, and we'll see what's going forward, but I can already tell you that Remender is going to be the one remembered for this book, and we'll see if this book survives past the second writer. And also the reason why I'm kind of hesitant to put it on this list, because it's still so current, I don't know, but there's so many, for me, like golden oldies that are brought up a million times, that this book is something amazing that I think people should check out, and I love it so much because I love Spider-Man so much, and it's just such a weird, dark twist on it that it's a book that always springs to mind for me. Alright, next is Authority Revolution. You might have already heard me talk about this book, so I don't want to ramble on too long about it because I already have a lengthy video tied to the whole Watchmen experience that we had gone through about this book, but I really felt this book kind of ushered in a new age, a new understanding of heroes, and really kind of cracked the door to new millennia, not only, you know, for being there at that moment, but in kind of an understanding of comics and kind of coming away from this whole 80s understanding and something, understanding the darkness, but allowing something a little brighter to come forward, which didn't really work out a year later, but it's still a very powerful read. Alright, the next, and again, these numbers are not necessarily in order. Again, these books are not, they're my top 10 of tonight. This could change tomorrow for, you know, top 10, but this is what I have. Wildcats 3.0. Now, this is really Joe Casey's. I mean, Dustin Nguyen takes most of the 3.0 run. You have Joe Casey setting up some things earlier in Wildcats of Volume 2, but Joe Casey transforms the Wildcats from slowly this, you know, well-received but essentially terrible 90s Image book that had some work by Scott Lobdell earlier, but Joe Casey takes it and transforms it into this socio-political, economical comic with powerful players and corporate espionage going on is kind of really the name of the game. Now that the initial thrust of the Wildcats is obviously completely gone. And just look at some of these covers. You just have some of the most bizarre stuff and some of the greatest, you know, assortment of ideas put together in a comic, and it's all held through this amazing narrative that's just put together. And Sean Phillips was back for that one, and it is an incredible run. I would recommend it to anyone. You can find the issues for about $1 still, I believe, if you look on the right sites. It is one of the most underrated books I know of, and if you enjoyed Matt Fraction's Invincible Iron Man at all, you have been cheated, because all he did was a cheap reproduction of this comic with slower pace, less action, and less ideas, and more crappy Tony Stark-isms for no good reason. So please check out this book. It is one of the unswung runs that really deserves more prominence in comics for the few things that it delivers that are rarely delivered upon in comics at all. Next up is The Secret Six. Gail Simone, obviously Nicholas Scott started, but really I associate this book with Jim Calafiore, which a lot of people consider to downgrade. I felt he fit the book perfectly, and if you don't know, Gail Simone and Jim Calafiore are working on a book called Leaving Metropolis, which you could go kick fund. It's closing soon. But Secret Six is a book that was something that I loved about the DC that I hate the new DC 52 for killing to this day. This was a book that was heralded and brought up a lot through the GBLTQ community, actually, for some, I don't want to say positive portrayals, but at least, you know, healthy relationship portrayals despite everything that goes on. But clearly, as you'll catch on, redemption stories are something that I key into for whatever reason. I feel allows for a good blanket character thing, whereas allowing enough story potential that you can actually have more interesting characters. Secret Six is something amazing. Started off Villains United, and it morphed into a book that really played through the DC universe, allowing you to see that things are less heroic than most books would have you believe, and you get to see these characters that by all rights should have more prominence but don't, because they live in such a heroic place. And it is just incredible writing, great. There's like one good laugh pretty much every issue, and anyone who's a big Batman fan, really in a lot of ways, these play on so many characters that are tied to Batman, and really fleshes them out and really proves again that Batman is the most boring character in his own universe, and the villains are always more interesting. The side characters are even more interesting as well. But yeah, and if nothing else, I mean, turning around Catman into one of the most beloved characters of the DCU instead of just a forgettable joke, basically, is no small feat, and that is all because of these books. So Secret Six is something that it is one of the few DC books that I still love and don't understand why it never got caught on or anything. It is just a cult classic for a reason. The next run that is still going, but has been going forever, is one of the best things being put out by Marvel, and has been consistently, and I didn't find out till about a year ago. X Factor by Peter David. This is Peter David's second term with X Factor, but it is stronger. Even though the old stuff is good, it's not nearly this good. this is a tremendous book, and it is nothing but character moments, and it even pokes fun in itself for the fact that these characters get so absorbed in their own little soap drama and whatnot that when they're on a case they'll just blather to each other, and the only problems that they really have are with themselves, and dealing with the cases are secondary. And you just have such rich characters that you feel are speak to you off the page. It's just unbelievable what comes out through Peter David with these guys and what they go through, and how much it actually reflects on the mutant community, while just so much being its own book, and yet being so much more important than most any X-Men book that's gone on throughout the run that this has been going on, just because the fact that it actually plays on what made most of the X books strong to begin with, is that you have a team, and whereas the roster may rotate, change up a little bit here and there, it is a team that sticks together and has ties to each other, and it's not just like a rotation of the season, and you don't have these characters that rely on each other or anything. You have these characters that have been dealing with each other and are a second family to each other, and it's so much richer for it, and exactly what a smaller team book should be. Phenomenal in every way. Everything about the writing in this book is everything comics need to be, and art's usually good, nothing that's going to blow your mind again, but it's always pretty strong. There's some arts that aren't drawn as well as others, of course, but c'est la vie. Okay, now we're in my top 5. Honestly, the bottom 5 are ones that I like, but I've read more recently, and from here on up are comics that are kind of more my roots, that I have a lot more tied to. I mean, a bit of nostalgia value, a bit of just a bit more raw and a bit more tried and true in my mind, a bit more personal to me, and stuff that I hear people talk about less. So, first of these, and one I don't hear anyone talk about ever anymore, is the Christopher Priest Black Panther run. Just two covers I love, though the art was never consistent on this book, and it was always at risk of being canceled. I found this book amazing. Again, socio-political sort of book. I mean, right here, alas, the fallen monarch. There's so much about this book, and so much about having a king. That's the sort of stuff that I normally hate, that's actually played in a way, an idea of nobility with pride, and it played on things that no other comic has played on, and was so much stronger. And also, this, I mean, a huge part of it, despite, Black Panther being from Wakanda, that it is about African American, and they really play in that, and also about foreign dignitaries and all that, and it just plays on these levels and expanded the Marvel Universe in so many ways. It is really the unsung hero of the 90s Marvel that no one talks about, and it's a true shame, because that book is the definitive Black Panther run. I don't care what anyone says, and I understand that there are some classic artists that have worked on the Black Panther, but no one has ever written it better, stronger, with more purpose, and then with more humor. And the best part is because the Black Panther, much like Batman, is a boring character. There was a framing device used throughout most of the series where you have this U.S. relations man who sums up and makes you realize how amazing the superheroics are, even though it's just kicks and punches. You get to see again, you have enough of a touch of reality to realize how incredible this is, and how there aren't really superpowers. He's just a souped up human, and it is the best run that I can guarantee that no one here has read. It is the Black Panther run, and Christopher Priest is a creator that I don't hear enough of, and you don't hear about too many black creators to begin with, and he was among the best of them and a great editor at Marvel. And whereas His Deadpool run is something that's kind of a point of contention with people. That was something that was kind of an editorial mess to begin with, but this Black Panther run is solid, and it's a shame that it couldn't have been stronger if he had just known that the book was going to continue as long as it was going to more from the onset. So, great read. Next is Gail Simone's Birds of Prey, and this is the book that I read that got me into DC. I didn't touch DC before I started reading this, and it's not really written like most DC books. It's not written the way Birds of Prey is written now. I don't know what happened with that book, but it's not the same thing at all. And a huge part of what made this book what it was Oracle. And this idea of agents going around trying to do good. It was very much, moving from here to there, but there were some themes that went through, and it was weird, like espionage, martial arts / pro-feminism. It was great. You had all these strong female characters, which was something I was kind of, just looking for in only the best way. It was the definitive run of so much of what Marvel and DC tries to do with the whole feminist idea, but just fails at now. You just need good stories with female characters that are definitively female at times, and just let the story happen. That's all it needs to be. You just need some awesome female characters out there, and that's what the book provided. And it was great that they dodged so many of the Wonder Woman issues that could have come up, and for the longest time that run was just female characters. There's no romance in it, and it was phenomenal for so many reasons, and you set up all these great villains and gray areas with the characters that I couldn't even know where to stop or begin with. It is just the book. It's the book that broke me out of being kind of a stupid Marvel zombie type kid and let me see that there was more even in the mainstream of comics. The next, to no one's surprise who knows me, is The Amazing Spider-Man. But whose run? J. Michael Straczynski's and John Romita Jr.'s run on The Amazing Spider-Man is phenomenal. Interestingly, the only rogue that's really played with throughout this run is Dr. Octopus for a kind of off issue, and that's more so that they can introduce someone challenging Dr. Octopus. And you really, throughout the run, you have this totemistic idea of the spider, and you play in this mythical idea. And for someone who's so... he's city-bound, but he's an earthbound character, and to play on so much spider mythos that already exists and deal with that and play with more of the science of it, too, for that, and a touch of history, it really gave a larger air to the mythos of the character without doing anything that was so drastic that you couldn't believe it, and allowed you to introduce a whole set of new characters and a whole new set and side to Spider-Man, really, instead of just this villain of the week. It gave a reason why he was fighting, with the Scorpion and the Rhino, and then didn't really touch on the whole Goblin thing for obvious reasons, but it allowed there to be some more themes to Spider-Man, and it opened up. And there's so many great thoughts held without, because this is the period where you had Spider-Man as a teacher, and that was so refreshing. It's one of many takes to get Spider-Man away from the photography angle, of course, because that was just played out. But you get to see so many little amazing bits, and this is when the Spider-Man movies were coming out, and there's some amazing plays off some of those ideas even held throughout. And there's this issue, which I have to bring up if I'm rating these things, because this is the first comic I got from the only time I ever subscribed to... Well, I subscribed to 2 comics at the time, but that's not work. I subscribed to The Amazing Spider-Man. This is the first issue that shows up. This, and appropriately, 9/11. This is the tribute issue. You can actually go into Comixology and download for free, because rightfully so, Marvel didn't want to really profit off this one. There's a moment with Doom that people find questionable, which is fair, but it shows, as much as I hate, the Manhattan, everyone's in New York, Spider-Man is a New Yorker. Him and Daredevil are the ones that deserve to be there because it's their city. And that's why it had to be Spider-Man who had this book, and it still chokes me up to read this, to remember all that. And it's a very powerful read. Also, just to speak to the John Romita Jr. side, which is no small part of why this is my favorite arc of Spider-Man, because I think this is the best Spider-Man's ever been drawn. Not only is it Romita Jr., but it's Scott Hanna, who does the coloring that really makes it so vibrant. And this is a great picture. I mean, obviously that's his foot, and that's his reflection in the window. That is an amazing cover. If this was a poster, it would be on my wall. So many things about that run, and it's great. And as a point of note, the minute John Romita Jr. is off, stop reading. It goes to shit the very next issue. But it ends with this whole totemistic idea and the whole arc with Morlun, and the idea that Spider-Man needs to fight against the opposing side of his totem. And it's the only time that you have a true natural duality, which is great because it's the whole nature angle again. So, enough on that for now. Okay, so my penultimate, and I'm cheating to say that in some ways, and you'll see why in a second, but my penultimate, my second from top pick, is Joe Kelly's run on Deadpool. I've said it before, and I will say it till I die. This is the greatest character arc in mainstream comics, hands down. And what you see Deadpool go through on an initial, just general story of redemption. He's a mercenary, he wants to become a hero, and they've done weird setbacks and things, but there's things from where Deadpool starts and is built up initially in this run to where Deadpool basically ends at Kelly's run. And T-Ray is the antithesis. He's supposed to be set up to be the ultimate villain of Deadpool, and it never quite works out because so many people were in some ways confused. It was confused by Frank Terry later, but there's a whole confusion about Wade Wilson and the identity and who owns that identity. That is the second crux of Deadpool. The first is this whole building of the Mithras and the idea that he's a chosen hero, and nobody wants to believe it, and Deadpool doesn't believe it himself. And you see why later, and why it has to be someone who's not just valor and someone who's not the most heroic type, and they even bring in Captain America to drive this home, that it had to be someone like Deadpool to fight something that isn't pure evil, but something that wants to destroy free will. And you need someone who has a little more fire in his pit than your normal hero in a few odd ways. And also, reading these comics, it's a Fire a minute, there's a million things, a million references, and you just keep going, and there's so many incredible moments. There's I think there's 3 frames which are permanent internet memes from this run. It is some of the best stuff and some of the most experimental things. No, it actually was the most experimental run of Marvel in the 90s. The flip out covers, the way they did the characters, the way they took some risks on art. There's of course the flashback to Spider-Man issue where they had to kind of create new technologies just to do that comic. The amount of breath that was given for this comic is incredible, and for something that never sold quite that amazing, it's kind of one of the last times I think that Marvel ever will take that kind of bizarre risks on a comic. I mean, as much as, yes, it's a Marvel comic, it's coming out every month, it is comic for pay, not so much art, in so many ways that run is comic art, even with the artist changing basically every issue. it's something incredible. It was lightning in a bottle, and as much as Joe Kelly is a fine writer and certainly known, especially now, for one of his finest Superman issues, Whatever Happened to Truth, Justice, and the American Way, nothing in my mind can top his Deadpool run. So as my first pick, a touch of a farce? Well, it's because I'm biased. Bias is all hell, and that is because of Deadpool. Gail Simone's run on Deadpool and then Agent X are, in my mind, the finest, best comics ever created. All done with the help of the Udon team, kind of rotating main artists, but it's all Udon, so it all looks fairly similar. And you have it starts off on its own run. Like, the last issue ended somewhere else, and this just kind of picks up, okay, it's something a little new. And you see where a mercenary in Marvel fits in a weird way, and you get to see kind of different corners of the Marvel universe, and it's more fun. And in the meanwhile, you build up one of the greatest villains to kind of go through. And here's a fun little aside. You have this cover for the end of Deadpool, bam, and then you switch over to Agent X, bam, and Agent X is amazing because this is all held during the Grant Morrison run of X-Men time, where you had all the X books with this bar along here, and it was a mandate to give a more cinematic feel to the Marvel books, and that was held without the X office at the time. And a huge reason I found out for this later is actually because Gail Simone was writing Deadpool and she got a call. "We love what you're doing with Deadpool. Great. We want to kill him." Okay. But we want to transfer the book to something else. It apparently was all a ploy with Deadpool and Cable to change the name so that they could change the license so that they wouldn't have to pay Liefeld royalties for the book anymore. Fair enough. I'm all on board for that. Especially consider, I understand he worked on the first book with Deadpool, but in so many ways Joe Kelly created Deadpool for what Deadpool is, really defined the character. Of course, you have others like Mark Waid working on Deadpool beforehand, and Joe Madureira really defining the look. But, could go on for hours. But this run, which they have not recollected, and I don't know why. I think single issues are at least 20 a pop, even if you're trying to bargain shop for these comics. Incredible books, incredible art, some of the best design you'll see, and it is... I've read them I don't know how many times, and I'll read them I don't know how many times again. Like, it may not be the deepest run, I'll admit, even compared to a lot of others that I've handled so far, but they're always fun to pick up, and there's a lot in there, and they are incredible. And why Marvel hasn't collected them, I don't know, because they're some of the few comics, despite owning the issues, I would buy and trade, because I'd like to keep those issues in a certain kind of condition, read them every day for the rest of my life. Incredible. So thanks for listening to me on that. If anyone else listened, of course, love to hear your top 10s. And yeah, again, Mr. Donnelly, thank you for putting that out there, and continue on. And hopefully I'll catch you all soon with another comic review.